ability to manage IR also explains the government's inability to manage information they have not, and trust an optical illusion argument besides saying the government can predict and we are bidding. That was not a warranted argument. Hold them to a very high threshold one hour explanation. The 1 hour just extended blips. If they're trying to clear warrant for every argument, the two the 1 hour, the 2 hour, you should not evaluate on more evidence of the synoptic illusion, otherwise the ability for governments to pick winners. This is an epistemology argument that they have no answer to. I flag this as a presumption argument. This is empirically proven by things like breeder reactors in the 1960s as well as ethanol at the beginning of this decade that didn't become cost competitive. I flag this as a reason about negative presumption. They've conceded that you can kick the alternative force because it was conditional. This is zero solvency argument, which means we have an epistemology to the entire solvency mechanisms that they cannot deal with now. The hegemony event the Germany causes war. They've conceded a slew of 1AC references to the plan that causes a drawdown, which answers the reason why we would intervene in the future. Some weighted statistics, the Montiero evidence, Professor at Yale from 2012, and it cites binary coding variables using OLS estimators that they have no game on. It also answered their Wolford evidence as the interstate war was 4 times more likely during hegemony. Beast one is structural line. This argument was dropped. The Ahmed and McClintock evidence is that hegemony is always acts most rationalized, but in the meantime, we run around to the periphery by sitting inside the cigar club and saying, oh, look how peaceful it is in here. When during the meantime, we do things like creating sanctions in other countries. The Hitchens evidence is that always on probability it's the most likely impact they made because more people have died from structural violence during the past 20 years than everywhere in human history. BC one is the stats quo generation uniqueness. The Dolby card was dropped in, and it's an amazing link from their Dresner evidence. It says, yes, war is down now, but that's because they value shifted and move away from the liberal ontology of warfare, but they have enforced that ontology by requires to domesticate other countries by enforcing a telos of peace in the future. This is a uniqueness argument that Miles started with, which also answered the McCormick card, which is the reason why Miles started with that in the 1 hour, because it means that fear is decreasing now because of value shifting with the plan reinvigorates it. Their Barnett evidence does not use statistical analysis from WPR. The Wolford evidence is answered by the Montiero evidence, who actually cites him specifically. The Bloomberg article is not from a poli-sci professor, it's from somebody posting on the AI with no empirical arguments. We've conceded their methodology arguments throughout the debate. We're the only ones making empirical arguments. Our pan evidence is that it undermines cooperation because we try to like their piece on our strategic chessboard, but they will never play the rules we conform. We try to render them noble and hench principle, which undermines cooperation and makes international warfare. Never really the oil advantage. Stop. They've conceded the disaster porn argument. This was the last card that Miles read in the 1 hour. That disaster representations mean that we just milk media stories for our existential capital to become politically anesthetized consumers of disaster stories. This interlink turns all of their reasons are forever about how you need to talk about things and you actually have the ability to change because voting for the affirmative undermines the ability to solve them in the future. This is a link to solvency and a reason why their fiat position is bad. Someone is the alternative solves the entirety of this advantage argument is just focusing on consumption means we reorient our ontological relationship to nature. That doesn't just treat it as a standard reserve. The pepper and background evidence fantastic. Miles references a bunch of 1AC evidence that says that we need to decrease consumption, which is an ultimate cause out of the truth. This evidence also makes us our obese one is there's no impact to shortages. The illusion evidence says that shortages plus cooperation is actually abundance that causes warfare because kids don't have the resource to fight during times of resource decline. 2 of our evidence from 2011 cites 3,000 empirical examples. Decent one is equals empirical. Now they've considered that the scare tactic of Barnaby evidence has been talking about it 50 years, and our evidence also says the U.S. just discovered a shit ton of oil in the U.S. which takes out the Spanish, which means you can just vote on heads bad. On the other hand, Decent one is the representation of shortages or self-fulfilling prophecy that means we do things like privatized water and eliminate other countries' ability to access resources because we think that there are going to be shortages in the future, especially if we win the synaptic delusion armor, which means that we can take it 100% of solvency, but still win the representation argument because if they have to solve the case, proves that would be last shot as a result of lack of solvency, which is all the Barnett evidence and Miles right over here. That's amazing. The Hirsch evidence, they don't access it. This evidence just says that Iran is nuclearizing, and therefore it is subject to miscalculation. If it's true that proliferation doesn't solve, then they did link turn all the wind link turn all their pure argument for the technology argument. Miles obviously scratched that. Think about this. The Twissy double turns himself, but then after reading the impact turn after the link turn says actually scratched that. That is obviously not a double turn feature. We scratched it mid-speech, and it obviously doesn't link to any of their double turn argument, especially because he didn't even start using it reading a card. The McCormick card, there's no link to their fear good argument. We are not rejecting the fear that disaster porn argument actually linked to this argument, and he did not make a warrant for this evidence because the alternative self-built evidence as we change values international the critique at the top. We are conceding the argument that you should weigh the probability that the alternative can solve anything. There's no political divide of the 1AC because the fact that their impacts are short time frame meaning there's no ability to solve it. We fiat silly. It's usually a dumb argument unless you say you have to have the ability to use the ballot to affect social change. The Cashman evidence has to answer someone is the Dresser evidence of Germany's necessary to solve all warfare, which means the reasons why war is down is ontologically teleological, which links to the reason why proximate causes are good. And their evidence also says multivariable focus is good, which proves our chaos theory argument that you cannot manage the international system. The CTL argument there's no external impact. There's nobody has read a warming impact, but they concede the 1 hour evidence. The WPR evidence is 55 times more likely to produce coal emissions, and they've conceded the argument that their evidence actually says that it is likely to allow us to develop CCS, but in the underlying part of the quantity says we actually need CCS before we're able to develop CTL. The framework arguments, we are scholars, we are all scholars, violence of social discussion before we become political. The Lundberg evidence of our critical thinking, we are lecturing our bills and evidences, we're able to spill over from the social sphere to the political sphere, for instance, by the Intifada, like the Intifada and the movements during the Cold War, the broad Gorbachev power that ended the Soviet Union. Policymakers focusing on policymaking themselves and individual responsibility for violence with linkers. The critical thinking argument, the greenwashing DA, also linkers, the consumerism and all affairs arguments are our evidences that they blackmail that their political blackmail ultimately results in greenwashing, showing new things like use green bulldozers that ultimately make environmental destruction and resource shortages. Neville, the paper analogy means we don't have to win most of the one he sees wrong, which we have done so by reading links they try to page. The plan focus is bad, it's unpredictable and kills critical thinking, introduces a 9-minute advocacy to 4-second sense and traits irresponsible students who don't defend their assumptions of the prospect if they form a promise and solution. She did not have an impact on our page. We are straight turning all the advantages, so it's not the same thing as taking advantage. This argument all answers the permutation as well because the will is evidence. He's answered by the backhouse card that says we need to focus on consumption before we focus on production because they only allow more insidious forms of practices. They, and this is especially true within the context of their CCS argument because the CCS evidence says we can lower CO2 emissions, but the fact that there's no one dynamic equilibrium in the environment means that we set a level of CO2 emissions and emit up until there was ultimately nationalized internal environmental destruction. The Peterson evidence has the permutation just an add and stir strategy that ultimately makes the destruction more insidious. This is true about the 1SC evidence says that we would move out of the Middle East into the unlike part of the continent. Just says that we would shift to Asia, which only makes more Neville. The vagueness arguments, the plan that's just vague, they've conceived this argument, a congressional plan that would actually be a 300-page document. We explain our critical theories and ask ourselves we have to ask questions before we answer them. We were impacted from the reason why we need a specific blueprint, which are all the arguments made in our Jones evidence, which is amazing. There's no quiet line for what is vague. They've conceived that argument. Vagueness is also good because it increases permutation. Ground reject the argument, not the team. The last couple arguments, the plan can actually be done to the abstract evidence. All is an impact argument without a link because we have contested the reasons why they are key to critical thinking because they absolve individual responsibility of the state, especially based on the disaster porn argument that was basically conceded.